The wind cut through the livestock auction yard like a blade, sharp and cold, slicing into the bones of every man, beast, and memory that wandered through it. Dust swirled around the cracked boots of old ranchers, and cigarette smoke curled in lazy ghosts above their heads. The wooden pens creaked under the restless shifting of cattle and horses, most of them already half broken by life long before a saddle ever touched their backs. Among them stood a creature that didn't belong here, not because he was special, but because he looked too far gone. The horse's coat was a patchwork of dried mud, hairless scars, and neglect. One of his eyes had a milky haze, his ribs pushed visibly against his skin, and every movement betrayed pain. His back left leg dragged ever so slightly, the limp not severe enough to stop him from walking, but just enough to make onlookers shake their heads. Some looked at him with pity. Most looked past him entirely. At the far end of the pen, a man in a faded brown coat leaned on the wooden rail, his weathered hands gripping the edge like it was the last thing tethering him to the present. His name was Samuel Hayes, and though his back was straight, something inside him had been bent for years. The auctioneer's voice called out numbers, barked bids, slapped humor into the air like a tired salesman trying to sell a ghost. No one bid. No one even looked. The auctioneer clicked his tongue and pointed toward the gaunt horse. "All right, boys, next up, lot 39. Might be good for glue or prayers. Let's start it at 50. Silence. Come on now. 30? Anyone?" He tried again, the horse shuffling awkwardly into the ring. The moment the rope tugged at its halter, the animal's ears pinned back. The whip didn't fall, not here, not visibly, but everyone knew the kind of training that made a horse flinch like that. Samuel watched without blinking. He didn't see just the present animal. He saw shadows of another time, soft laughter, the smell of lilacs, a girl with a mane of copper curls leading a pony down the path behind the barn. His daughter Emily had lived and breathed horses. She had taught him how to see beyond the surface. 20, the auctioneer grunted, annoyed now. 10? Anyone? Someone in the crowd chuckled. "You'll have to pay us to take that thing." The joke drew a small ripple of laughter. Samuel's hand went up. The auctioneer paused, unsure whether it was a real bid. 10, we got 10. 100, Samuel said, voice steady. A few heads turned. The laughter stopped. The auctioneer blinked. "Well now, 100 it is. Sold." A single gavel crack broke the moment in half. Samuel stepped forward, ignoring the whispers behind him. "He's crazy," someone muttered. "That horse is barely alive. He's got a death wish or a savior complex." Old fool. He approached the animal slowly, his boots crunching softly against gravel. The horse lowered his head, as if expecting a blow. Samuel didn't offer touch, not yet. He simply stood there, close enough to share breath, far enough not to crowd. "You're not mine," Samuel murmured quietly. "Not yet, but we'll see." The horse's ears twitched, and for a second, something flickered in his foggy eye. Not recognition, not hope, just a pause in the constant fear. The volunteer handed him the lead rope. Samuel took it gently. The horse didn't resist, nor did he follow willingly. He moved because there was no other choice. They walked slowly toward an old trailer parked at the edge of the lot. The wind lifted bits of Samuel's hair, and the horse's tail, thin and brittle, hung like a torn banner behind him. With each step, Samuel felt the weight of more than just the rope in his hand. It was Emily's voice, echoing in memory. Asterisk, they only need one person to believe in them, Dad. Asterisk, he remembered the last time she'd said that. It had been late summer. The horse she'd rescued back, then had kicked her out of fear. A broken neck, a funeral with white roses, and silence in the barn ever since. He hadn't touched a horse since that day. Inside the trailer, the horse stood uneasily but didn't panic. Samuel tied him loosely and stepped out, closing the gates softly behind him. He stood there for a while, hand resting on the metal, before finally turning the key in the ignition. The engine rattled to life like something half awake from a long sleep. The drive home was silent, except for the rattling of the trailer. Samuel didn't turn on the radio. He didn't look in the rearview mirror either. Whatever lay behind him, in both memory and metal, wasn't going anywhere. He would face it soon enough. The farm was 30 miles outside town, nestled between two dry hills and bordered by an old stone wall that had outlasted every generation of Hayes men who built it. When Samuel pulled in, dusk was settling like a blanket over the fields. The barn stood quiet and unused. The paddock was overgrown, but the fence was still solid. He unloaded the horse slowly. No sudden movements. No expectations. The animal blinked at the surroundings, then took a tentative step onto the gravel path. His hooves made soft clicks, like shy words trying to form. Samuel guided him to the small quarantine paddock near the barn. The gate creaked open, and the horse stepped inside. Once the rope was removed, he turned his head toward Samuel. Not away. Not toward freedom. Just toward. Samuel left the gate open for a moment longer than needed. Then he closed it gently. In the dimming light, the outline of the horse stood motionless in the paddock. No pacing. No defiance. Just stillness. Inside the house, Samuel poured himself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen window, looking out. He couldn't name what had pulled him to that horse today. Pity, maybe? Guilt? Or something older than both, a longing to fix what couldn't be fixed. He took a sip and set the glass down. Outside, the horse hadn't moved. Samuel watched him until night erased the shape completely, and only the memory of that one flicker, that half-second of recognition, kept him standing there. Something had started, and neither of them knew yet what it would cost. The following morning brought a muted kind of silence, the kind that settles in after a long storm, not outside, but within. The sky hung low and gray above Samuel's land, stretching like a woolen blanket across the hills. The horse stood just where Samuel had left him, in the center of the paddock, motionless except for the slow turn of one ear at the sound of the farmhouse door creaking open. Samuel walked out carrying a bucket of oats in one hand and a flake of hay tucked under the other arm. His boots sank slightly into the dew-damp grass. He didn't speak, didn't whistle, just approached the fence and set the food down inside without stepping in. The horse didn't move. He watched from a few feet away as the minutes stretched. The oats remained untouched. Samuel nodded slightly, as if that were the answer he'd expected. He walked away without looking back. Inside the barn, the dust smelled of wood rot and memories. He found an old brush in a rusted tin box and sat on an overturned crate, oiling it slowly, methodically. The smell of leather polish filled the space, bringing back flashes, Emily's boots in the corner, her soft humming as she worked, the way she always talked to the horses like they were old friends. She would have been gentle with this one. That evening, Samuel returned to the paddock and leaned on the fence. The horse had moved only slightly, enough to shift weight from one leg to another. The hay had been nibbled, not eaten. The bucket sat on its side. "You're thinking about leaving," Samuel said softly, not expecting a reply. "Or maybe you've already left inside." The horse flicked his tail. Not a reaction, more a reflex. A few days passed like that. Routine, silent, patient. Samuel fed him, waited, cleaned the paddock. He didn't try to touch the horse. Not yet. Trust was a language slower than speech. And this animal had forgotten every syllable. One morning, rain threatened in the clouds but held its breath. Samuel brought the bucket as usual and noticed something different. The horse stepped forward. 2 steps. Hesitant but deliberate. Then stopped. Samuel froze too, not wanting to spook the moment. A single breath passed between them. The horse lowered his head and began to eat. That night, in the quiet of the kitchen, Samuel looked at the empty chair across from him. He whispered into the silence, "He's eating, Em." The next morning, Samuel opened the barn for the first time in months. Dust floated in golden shafts of light, illuminating half-forgotten tools and cobweb-covered saddles. He cleared out a stall slowly, dragging old straw into the wheelbarrow, repairing broken slats with hands that remembered the rhythm of work even when the heart hesitated. When he brought the horse in later, the animal resisted only slightly. He paused at the barn door, his hooves clicking against the concrete threshold. Samuel stepped aside, allowing space, offering no pressure. After a long pause, the horse stepped inside, his body tense but willing. "I won't trap you," Samuel said gently, closing the gate behind him. "This isn't a prison, just a place to start over." That evening, Martha came by. Her arrival was quiet but unmistakable, the rattle of a pickup door, boots on gravel, a thermos in one hand. She had been Emily's godmother once, and more of a horse whisperer than she ever claimed to be. She leaned on the fence beside Samuel, eyes narrowed at the dark shape inside the stall. "Looks like something scraped out of hell," she muttered, not unkindly. Samuel nodded. "But he's still standing. That counts for something." They watched in silence. "You naming him?" she asked after a while. Samuel considered. "Not yet. Doesn't feel right. Like naming a wound before it heals." Martha sipped her coffee. "He's got fight in him, but you can't just feed a horse back to life. You have to be willing to bleed with him a little. Samuel met her gaze, and for a flicker of a second, his mask slipped. Pain crept into the corners of his eyes. I already have, he said. She didn't push further. Just nodded once, and left a small bag of herbal salve on the gate before heading back to her truck. Over the next week, Samuel introduced the brush. Slowly. He didn't walk straight in. Instead, he let the horse see it. Smell it. He stood a few feet away, and waited. When he did step forward, the horse stepped back. Not with aggression, but uncertainty. All right, Samuel whispered. Tomorrow, then. It took 5 days before the brush touched skin. And when it did, the horse flinched hard. Samuel backed away immediately. No scolding, no shame. Just space. But on the 6th day, the brush met the coat again, and this time, the horse didn't move. His body remained stiff, but he allowed it. Samuel spoke only once during that brushing. You're not the only one learning how to breathe again. That evening, as Samuel ran a damp cloth along the horse's neck, he saw something half hidden beneath matted hair near the shoulder. A raised mark scarred over. It looked like a brand, old, faint, but unmistakable. He crouched, careful not to startle the horse, and examined it more closely. The shape was crude, a twisted combination of letters. Unofficial. Likely illegal. He'd seen a similar one once, years ago, in a newspaper article about underground racing rings. Horses beaten into obedience. Drugged to run through injuries. Used until they broke. He stood slowly, heart beating heavier now. Not just with pity, but anger. Quiet and controlled, but real. That's where you came from, he murmured. They tried to destroy you. The horse blinked slowly. His body shifted not away, but toward. Samuel placed a hand gently on his shoulder. This time, the horse didn't flinch. Outside, the wind changed direction. A storm was coming. But inside the stall, something had finally begun to settle. Tomorrow, Samuel would call Martha. He needed answers. But tonight, he just stood there, hand resting on the once broken creature who now, just maybe, had taken his first step back toward being whole. The wind had shifted for days now, carrying with it a bite that hinted at early winter. Samuel noticed the change in shadow before he noticed it in the trees. The horse no longer kept to the far edges of the paddock, no longer flinched at every sound or gesture. He moved slower still, but with awareness now, his ears tuned to Samuel's voice, his eyes no longer clouded only by fear, but by quiet question. What's next? Samuel didn't know. He spent his mornings walking with Shadow in the small round pen he'd repaired. No saddle, no halter, just presence. At first, Shadow wouldn't follow. He'd watch Samuel with caution, standing like a statue, still waiting for something to snap. But over time, 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, the distance between them narrowed. And then one morning, without cue, Shadow began to walk beside him. Samuel didn't smile, but something in him loosened. Later that week, he stood with Martha beside the paddock, the scarred brand still fresh in his mind. That horse comes from something ugly, she said, her gaze fixed on Shadow. That mark. I saw one just like it in New Mexico. Fighting circuit. Illegal. They drug them, tie them down, beat them until they obey. Samuel's jaw tightened. And when they don't, they're left to rot. Or worse. The image hit harder than he expected. Shadow, broken down and discarded, not just by cruelty, but by a system built to consume. Why'd you bring him here, Sam? Martha asked quietly, without judgment. He took a long time to answer. Because I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw something other than silence. Martha placed a hand on his shoulder. Be careful not to see what you want. Horses don't forgive easily, and they never forget. Samuel nodded, but he wasn't trying to be forgiven. He was trying to matter again. The town began to whisper. Word traveled faster than wind in a place like theirs. A few locals dropped by uninvited. Curious eyes peered over the fence. Some brought scraps of advice, others brought warnings. Heard you took in a fight horse, one man said. Ought to put him down. You got grandkids coming around. I don't, Samuel replied curtly, then turned away. Shadow wasn't dangerous. He was afraid. There was a difference, one the town didn't care to understand. But fear had its own shape, and it revealed itself one night when thunder rolled low over the hills. The first crack of lightning split the sky, and Shadow screamed. Samuel jolted upright from bed, his knee throbbing as he grabbed his coat and rushed outside. The wind tore through the fields, and rain began to fall like needles. Inside the stall, Shadow kicked hard, slamming into the walls, eyes wide with panic. Samuel opened the gate without thinking. The horse lunged past him, into the night. He chased him blindly across the field, soaked and limping, heart pounding against memory and mud. For a moment, he saw another form in a rain, Emily, the night she died, running after her frightened horse, barefoot and crying. He stopped in the middle of the pasture, chest heaving. "Shadow!" he shouted into the storm. No answer. Only wind and fear, and the sound of hooves disappearing into the dark. He spent 2 hours searching, calling, waiting, hoping. He found Shadow near the edge of a ravine, shaking, legs trembling, eyes wild but unseeing. Samuel approached slowly, whispering nonsense, the way Emily used to. "It's all right, boy. It's all right. I'm here now." He reached out. Shadow didn't flinch. He simply sagged forward, his head pressing gently against Samuel's chest like a child who'd stopped pretending not to cry. Samuel led him back in silence. No halter, no rope, just trust. Inside the stall, he dried him slowly, whispering the whole time. Words he didn't even know he still had inside him. Words that didn't ask for anything. That night, he slept in barn. The hay prickled his back, and the storm passed without another cry. The next morning, Martha arrived with a flyer in her hand. "You might want to see this," she said, handing it over. It was a local announcement for a regional trust and response exhibition, an event not about speed, but connection. No whips, no bits, no commands. Just the bond between horse and handler. Samuel stared at the paper for a long time. "It's not about winning," Martha added. "It's about showing up." "I haven't entered anything in 20 years, he said. Martha tilted her head. "He has." They spent the next few weeks preparing, not for competition, but for communication. Samuel built small obstacles in the round pen. Barrels, ropes, hanging streamers that fluttered in the wind. Shadow eyed them warily at first, refusing to step forward. But Samuel didn't coax. He didn't correct. He waited. One morning, Shadow stepped over a tarp on his own. Another day, he paused at a wooden bridge, then crossed without prompting. Progress came in inches, not leaps. But each inch mattered more than any mile. One afternoon, while brushing his side, Samuel noticed something remarkable. New hair was growing where old scars had once been. Faint, soft, untouched by violence. A beginning. But fear doesn't vanish. It waits in corners. During one training session, a neighbor's truck backfired near the fence. The sound cracked like a gunshot. Shadow reared, eyes white, hooves flailing. Samuel froze, heart lodged in his throat. The horse landed, breathing hard, but didn't run. He turned toward Samuel, shaking, but still looking for him. "I'm here," Samuel said again, grounding the moment. "I'm not leaving." Shadow dropped his head. That evening, Samuel sat in the barn long after sundown, a worn photograph in his hand. Emily in her riding helmet, arms wrapped around a chestnut mare. Her smile, frozen in time, was still stronger than his grief. "I think he's ready," he whispered into the stillness. "And maybe I am too." In the darkness, the sound of Shadow's hooves shifting in straw was steady and calm. Outside, for the first time in weeks, the stars returned to the sky. The morning of the exhibition dawned with the kind of stillness that carried weight. Fog clung to the earth like memory, low and unshifting, and the sun took its time climbing through it. Samuel stood in the doorway of the barn, his hands resting lightly on the wooden frame, watching Shadow chew calmly on hay, unaware of the attention he would soon draw. The horse had filled out. His coat had darkened into a deep chestnut sheen, and though the scars remained, they were no longer what you saw first. It was his posture now, alert but not afraid, present but not defensive, that spoke of change. Samuel brushed him slowly, with care and reverence, as if dressing an old friend for a long-awaited reunion. His own hands trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the weight of everything they were carrying to that field: grief, hope, failure, and forgiveness. He hadn't been in front of a crowd in years, not since before Emily's accident. The world had moved on without asking him, and he had let it. They arrived at the fairgrounds just after 9. Trucks lined the pasture beyond the event field, each with trailers, polished tack, and handlers with bright-colored shirts and confident strides. Samuel stepped out of his truck slowly, blinking into the bustle. He didn't look like the others. No custom boots, no branded vest, no sponsor badge. Just an old man with a quiet horse, walking side by side through the dust. The announcer's voice crackled through the loudspeakers, welcoming participants. Horses moved through warm-up rings with grace and precision. Shadow kept his head low but his steps even, absorbing the sights and sounds with cautious attention. A few people stopped and looked. A girl pointed at the faint brand on Shadow's shoulder. A man in a cowboy hat whispered something to his companion and shook his head. The murmurs trailed behind them, like smoke from a fire that hadn't burned out yet. Samuel ignored it. He stood at the gate and waited his turn, one hand resting on Shadow's neck. The horse didn't flinch at the gate's rattle, didn't spook when the previous rider galloped past. Instead, he leaned ever so slightly into Samuel's hand, just enough to be felt. The gate opened and their names were called. They stepped into the arena together. It wasn't a race, and it wasn't a performance. It was a course meant to test trust, bridges, tunnels, sudden noises, unfamiliar textures underfoot. For trained horses, it was a challenge. For a horse like Shadow, it was a trial by fire. Samuel took a breath and unclipped the lead. Shadow stood by his side, untethered. The first obstacle was a shallow pool with floating balls bobbing on the surface. Shadow hesitated, nose flaring, but Samuel didn't pull or press. He walked slowly forward, stepping into the water himself, boots sloshing. He looked back once, said nothing, and kept walking. After a pause, Shadow followed. Each step forward was earned. The fluttering flags, the wooden bridge, the corridor lined with plastic barrels, every element of the course asked the same question. Do you trust him enough to move through this? And every time, Shadow answered yes, not loudly, but with steadiness, one hoof at a time. Halfway through, a loudspeaker popped with feedback. The sound sliced through the air like a whip crack, sharp and unplanned. Shadow's head shot up, muscles locking. For a long second, the world froze. Samuel didn't move. He just stood still, eyes on Shadow, breath slow, heart open. I'm here, he said softly. Shadow exhaled. Not a dramatic snort or a showy shake of his head. Just a breath, low and real. Then he stepped forward again. By the time they reached the last station, a simple platform they had to stand on together, the crowd was no longer whispering. They were watching in silence. Samuel climbed the platform first, turning to face Shadow, arms open at his sides. Shadow looked up at him, blinked, and climbed beside him. The buzzer sounded. Their round was done. Applause broke like a gentle wave, polite but unsure. It wasn't the wild clapping of a perfect score or a champion performance. It was something quieter, slower to rise, respect earned, not demanded. Samuel nodded once to the judge, then turned and walked out, Shadow following without cue. In the holding area, a young girl approached, maybe 7 or 8. She reached out her hand toward Shadow, then paused, uncertain. Samuel knelt beside her. Go ahead, he said. He'll let you. The girl reached again, her fingers brushing Shadow's nose. The horse lowered his head, eyes calm. What's his name? She asked. Samuel looked at the horse for a long moment. Shadow, he said, but he's not running from anything anymore. Later, back at the farm, twilight settled over the hills like a promise kept. The sky was soft with peach and lavender, and the barn glowed gold in the slanted light. Samuel sat on the porch, a worn photograph of Emily in his hands, the same one he'd carried in his coat pocket all day. She would have loved him, he whispered. In the paddock, Shadow stood near the fence, ears forward, watching the house as if waiting for something. Samuel rose slowly, walked down the porch steps, and crossed the yard until they stood face to face. He didn't reach out, didn't speak. Shadow stepped forward, pressed his forehead gently against Samuel's chest, and stood there. There were no more fences between them, no more need for words. Only breath and presence, and a quiet that finally felt whole.